Mac here with you on Birds 365. First guest of the day, the esteemed colleague and contributor for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and you can catch him on WIP as well. I've been catching Marcus a little often of late. Good to hear his voice on WIP, and good when we get him on here with us on Birds 365. Marcus Hayes jumps in. So we're starting right where John and I left off. Eagles fired both of their coordinators. You want to go all three and put Matt Patricia in there too? Yeah, that wasn't. There's no
Michael Clay. Michael Clay lives. Michael Clay,
and God bless him. He had a good year. You got a problem with them moving on from either of the two guys? I know it was just 1 year, not much of a chance to prove themselves, but they said not good enough. We're going elsewhere. You got a problem with either of those two decisions, Marcus?
I always considered Brian Johnson a 2-year hire. You can't ask a guy to come into the NFL as a quarterback's coach and be a home run offensive coordinator right away. It just didn't make any sense to me to promote him from quarterback's coach to offensive coordinator and then give it with a head coach who has, right of first refusal or final say or whatever, and blame him for the regression in Jalen Hurts and the offense in general. Shane Steichen wasn't a great offensive coordinator in 2021. Shane Steichen is a very good head coach and was a very good offensive coordinator in the 2 years after that. So I was a little actually surprised to see Brian Johnson get the axe. In fact, in part because he's kind of one of those Jeffrey Lurie guys. Lurie loves him. He thinks he's smart. He thinks he's marketable. He's by far, for my money, John, he's by far the best presented guy on the stage. He may not give you great answers, but he's very, very well spoken. He's very, very direct. And I think, you risk losing. It's intriguing to me that they had an issue with the quarterback and at least one of his wide receivers going rogue occasionally and admitted it. They said, they have the freedom to do this, A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts. Mm-hmm. And then you take Jalen Hurts' godfather away. So it just seems like for an organization that has so often had issues with the quarterback, and whoever the offensive coordinator or head coach is, they would do something that would clearly upset Jalen Hurts as much as this would logically upset Jalen Hurts.
Right. I was going to say, do you know something we don't know? Has Jalen said anything off the record, behind the scenes? Why the hell are they doing it to my guy here? Or has he kept his usual flatline personality and seems to be take on everything that it's football and life is life and we need to improve and it's on me? Did you get any sense and or any inside information that Jalen's not happy with the decision?
There is no inside information with Jalen. He doesn't talk to people close to him.
Right.
But what his response when he was asked to endorse Nick Sirianni at the end of the year was, we all have to get better. And he wasn't asked about Brian Johnson. And to me, that let me know that he didn't think that Brian Johnson was the problem. He didn't mention himself pointedly much either. I don't think Jalen Hurts was delighted with the way that Nick Sirianni ran things this year. I think that he thought that there should have been a step forward in the head coaching performance, and maybe Brian Johnson should have been better supported by Nick Sirianni. That said, that's my gut, that's my feeling, having been around Jalen for 3 years and sort of being around the room and being around the players. There's no greater insight or intel there. But to answer your question, I'm a little surprised they were as willing as they were to move on from Brian Johnson, because I thought it was kind of you got to give a guy 2 years. You can't expect a guy who's never done it before to be, lights out, immediately. And number one, number two, the head coach has culpability there. And number three, you can only do so much as a coach if your players aren't running the plays you call.
Well, that's true as well. Yeah. Now, that's kind of my take on it as well, Marcus, from the perspective of, shouldn't it be baked in when you're hiring Brian, promoting Brian, hiring Sean, who had 1 year of experience, but a very young defensive coordinator. Shouldn't it be baked in from Jeffrey's standpoint? Nobody, and that's why I'm so happy to have you here. Nobody's been around Jeffrey Lurie in this town more than you. Shouldn't that be baked into Jeffrey's thinking that this isn't a finished product? If you're hiring these guys, you're putting these guys in this position, it's going to take more than a year. You can't be reactionary from my standpoint. And history says around this league, not just Philadelphia, continuity is better than the alternative. He seems to be very reactionary to me, Marcus, when things don't go as expected. You think that's fair or unfair?
I think it's accurate. Sean Desai was a bad hire. He was the wrong hire. Everybody in the building knew it was the wrong hire, except Nick Sirianni, assuming Nick Sirianni was the one who made the hire, and it wasn't Howie Roseman.
Well, Howie found him. Howie found him. But that's Howie's job. That's part of Howie's job. Now, the way they've set it up, Marcus, is when Nick doesn't have a guy in his pocket, Howie goes out and finds candidates, and then Nick interviews and approves them, and hires the guy once and hires the guy once.
You had it.
Well, you're talking about Denard?
Right. Denard Wilson was the guy that should have been hired as defensive coordinator. I was just in Baltimore. I heard from both locker rooms that they couldn't believe Denard Wilson, who might be the best coach on either staff, according to several players and coaches in that building, that Denard Wilson was fired by Nick Sirianni. Okay. So he had a guy. And it is absolutely not Jeffrey's job or Nick's job or Howie's job to hire assistant coaches. They do it.
No, but
they take that responsibility, but it is a head coach's job to understand the network of coaching and have 3 or 4 guys in his pocket. Now, one of the reasons Doug got fired is because he didn't do that diligence, right? He didn't do that. Nick does it. Now, whether or not it was Nick's decision, his agreement, whether it's Howie's guy or Nick's guy, the point is Sean Desai was the wrong guy. And you know that because when he was demoted, almost no one said he shouldn't have been demoted.
I said
that's not true. 2 for 2 here on Bird
in the locker room.
I know what you're saying.
In the locker room,
gotcha.
guys.
I know what you're saying.
I don't care what you guys think. What I care about is the guys who could stand up for Sean Desai did not stand up for Sean Desai. And you were there, John. The first time we had a chance to talk to these guys was after the demotion and after the game. And several guys said, well, it's good to get a fresh perspective.
Well, you know who put Sean Desai on the Eagles' radar? Vic Fangio. They wanted to keep the same stupid scheme, which we know. No offense, Vic, because Vic, at least if you're going to run it, you got the guy who understands it better than anybody else. But the Eagles wanted to keep the scheme, the same similar system. They couldn't. The timing didn't work out with Vic Fangio. And they went to Vic, and obviously everybody there has a close relationship with Vic. And Vic recommended Sean. And, not to say it's the right decision, wrong decision, because I'm with you. I think Nick Sirianni should have kept Denard Wilson. But once Nick makes that decision, and you see it, Nick has his guys, Kevin Patullo, Jason Michael, most notably still in the staff, obviously Shane, Jonathan were big parts of that. And then there were other guys like Brian Johnson. Howie went out and found Brian Johnson. Then Nick does the interviews with the other quarterback coaches. James Urban, you were down in Baltimore. He was one of them, I believe. And he makes the decision as who he wants to be the quarterback coach. But I find it ironic from this organization's perspective, Marcus, because the same thing you mentioned, Doug. Well, Doug was with Andy Reid. I always thought this was such a dumb narrative because when things started going bad with Doug, it was, he doesn't have a Rolodex of coaches because he should have been fired every year and went from staff to staff. No, he's on Andy's staff, which is the best staff to be on. So, and his first coaching staff, which was helped with, was obviously very good. And then you had attrition. Guess what? Andy had one of the greatest coaching staffs of all time. You know that, 1999. And when the attrition started, it gets a little bit worse, a little bit worse. But the thing Jeffrey Lurie's Eagles do, Marcus, they scapegoat. They scapegoat. And they look to assign blame. And guess what? If you want to assign blame, you should have fired the stinking head coach. Now you got the head coach around a bunch of guys he doesn't know, he doesn't trust. Maybe he develops that trust, but he had guys he trusted. They were good for 2.5 years, and now they're idiots. It doesn't make sense to me. Make it make sense, Marcus.
I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, either you want to, are you saying fire? You should fire Nick Sirianni? Look, we were talking about Sean Desai. We're talking about Sean Desai, okay? Sean Desai shouldn't have been hired. Sean Desai did a bad job, and he got demoted in the middle of the year, which was crazy. He should have just been fired, just for dignity.
Once you make that decision, number one, you should have fired him. Yes.
Number two, like, a lot of what you just posited is not how I understand it, particularly Brian Johnson. I mean, just because he was coaching in Florida doesn't mean how he found him. I don't think he was a Nick guy either, but I think he was like the only concession, except for Stoutland, obviously, on that staff. Whereas Doug, when I was at one of the championship games in 2000, after the 2015 season, 2016, January, when Doug was hired, and I was told correctly that Doug was hiring Frank Reich as his offensive coordinator. And I said, okay, who else is he hiring? And the guy said, well, they're going to keep Stoutland. I said, all right, who else? And the guy said, that's all he's hiring.
Right.
Jim Schwartz hired his entire defensive staff himself. Okay. And Doug hired Frank Reich and retained Stoutland. So, and if you look at that staff, that initial staff, there's some sort of weird guys on that staff. There's kind of the hinky guys on that staff. So, all that said, yes, I think it was reactionary to fire Brian Johnson, who subsequently got head coaching and offensive coordinator interviews other places, and whose offense, soup to nuts, was not nearly as bad as the defense. But I don't think it was reactionary to fire Sean Desai. I think that was a question of them, as they have done so many times in the past, trying to be the smartest people in the room and hire a guy nobody else would have considered for that job to begin with.
All right, so let me ask you this, and you said it a couple of times, Sean Desai was a bad hire. When you say that, is that Marcus Hayes' opinion? Is that your sources within the team, the players, whoever else you talk to, their opinion? And either way, when did whoever you're referring to know this? Because I think you could make that argument at some point during the year, but right off the bat, in camp, 3 games in, 5 games in, when it become common knowledge as to whoever you're referring to, Sean Desai was a bad hire?
Well, again, not everybody believes today that he's a bad hire, so it's not common knowledge. Right. The inside the building, people were surprised that Sean Desai was the golden boy immediately. Not everybody, just few people. Around the league, people were astonished that Denard Wilson didn't get the job because they thought it was a Brian Johnson hire. You just promote the guy who's the best assistant on the staff, who's young and has the room. Inside the room, they're amplified by the hiring of Matt Patricia. Inside the room, and I wrote this when the day I found out Nick Sirianni fired Brian, actually the day after, I wrote this column. The players were outraged, and so that was immediate. That was literally the day after he fired him. I wrote the story, which was the day the story broke. Okay. So immediately, lots of people were like, who is this guy? This is a bad idea. And around the league, people who didn't know the team, didn't know the inner workings, were surprised that Denard Wilson, who has done a spectacular job in Baltimore on John Harbaugh's staff, wasn't just promoted. It seemed seamless. It seemed easy. So immediately, for some people, and as the year progressed, and John can attest to this too, there wasn't a whole lot of like, wow, Sean Desai was a great hire coming out of the locker room or anywhere around the league. So, and if you look at what they had, okay, they had issues at linebacker. But going into the year, they had two, Pro Bowl caliber cornerbacks who had a horrible year. They had a whole defensive line, like everybody's either a first-round pick or a multi-million-dollar signing, that had a horrible year. And they had a horrible year pretty much from the start. There were times when they beat bad teams, John, but they didn't play well. Just because you win doesn't mean you're good. Jim Schwartz in the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
But the Sean Desai, and I don't mean to. Sean Desai didn't hire himself. You know what I'm saying? Like, Sean Desai did the best job he could. I just don't think he's cut out for that job, myself personally, and it proved to be true. You're also asking Sean Desai with 1 year of experience in Chicago, I believe, under Vic, or succeeding Vic, I believe.
After Vic left.
After Vic left.
And I was there for that year too. That was the Double Doink year, right? So I was embedded in Chicago for the week before Double Doink. Sean Desai wasn't like a star assistant coach. He wasn't walking around like I'm the next.
Well, that's the thing I get
saying?
with Sean. Yeah, Sean doesn't have a presence. So you're coming off Jim Schwartz, who owns the building, basically, walks around like he owns the building, has this tremendous presence. JG has this enormous presence, former defensive back. He carries himself around the players. I think Sean's that understated sort of, that's his background, right? Teaching.
And here's the thing, right? You're going into a room with, I think, 5 Georgia Bulldogs who are national champions and think they played on the greatest defense ever. Yes. And I'm not being facetious. They are, national champions who people saying 2 years ago played on the greatest defense ever, in college. And then you've got Fletcher Cox, who's probably going to go to Hall of Fame. Brandon Graham, who's going to be in the Ring of Honor. Josh Sweat, who thinks that he is the greatest pass rusher in the world and should, that's how you get confidence. Hassan Reddick, who's probably the best free agent signing Howie's had in a long, long time, even though he makes $15 million a year. And your defensive coordinator is this guy.
Yeah, look, I'm saying in the situation, and obviously after the collapse, I do think there were pockets of good defense. Week 3, Tampa Bay. Week 5, the Rams. Week 7, most notably against Miami, who was having a great year offensively. So they were all early in the season. They were all with Sean Desai. They were all before the injuries, the attrition started. I'm not saying the guy did a great job by any stretch of the imagination. All I'm saying, similar to Brian Johnson, you've got to expect growing pains. Now, if you think the guy doesn't have it, as you're insinuating, Marcus, I'm not in the building. I'm in the building a lot. Outside the building, where we sit. But I don't get to see him do his job, meticulously. So if you think the guy's overmatched, all right, you got to make a difficult decision. That's certainly a possibility. But from my standpoint, Jeffrey should have expected growing pains with both of these coordinators. And I think most of the problems on defense were personnel related. And I don't care if it were Vic Fangio and Vic is going to show up and people think he's the savior. Guess what? He ain't going to be the savior unless Howie gets better personnel. And the injuries were a part of it. So all of that factors in. Had a much more difficult time than Brian, who had a much better personnel situation from the offensive perspective. But look, it's Nick's decision. As you mentioned, I agree with Marcus Hayes. I would have elevated Denard Wilson. Nick did not. So if Nick's making all these mistakes, why is Nick here and you're blowing out everybody else?
But again, you're assuming that Sean Desai was Nick's decision. I don't know about you, but I've heard both sides. I've heard that this was a Howie Jeffrey hire, more a Howie hire than a Jeffrey hire, but Jeffrey liked it. And I'm not sure that, which blows my mind a little bit, because Nick hired most of his entire staff and went to the Super Bowl. And it's difficult for me to digest that he wasn't allowed to replace his defensive coordinator with a defensive coordinator of his choice, unless the Eagles weren't particularly delighted with his choice of defensive coordinator initially, and they went to the Super Bowl in spite of Jonathan Gannon. So, but these are crazy intrigues, right?
Well, they were going to hire Jonathan before they hired Nick. They were going to hire Jonathan if they went with Josh McDaniels. So in a lot of ways, it was a Jim Schwartz.
I don't think Josh McDaniels was very interested in Jonathan Gannon. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, Sean Desai didn't get any interviews after he got fired. Brian Johnson got head coaching and offensive coordinator interviews after he got fired. So you're not talking apples to apples here. One, I think, is reactionary. The other one, I think, is fixing a pretty glaring and egregious mistake.
All right, so let's look at the head coach, Marcus. And you'll appreciate this because you take crazy callers on WIP too. Someone said to me last night, well, what exactly is Nick Sirianni going to do this year? Is he getting paid to be a cheerleader? He's not running the offense. Why would you keep him around? And I noted to him that, and this is probably the wrong weekend to do it because both the team lost. Dan Campbell doesn't call plays in Detroit, but people sing the praises of Dan Campbell. The main thing Dan Campbell does.
They used to sing the praises of Dan Campbell.
Right. Well, and most people still do after you take a step back and go, all right, he took too many gambles on 4th down in the championship game, but he's also the guy who elevated the Detroit Lions to a championship game, which they haven't been in decades. And oh, by the way, that Harbaugh guy who had the best regular season in the entire National Football League doesn't call plays either. So we have examples of CEO coaches that work in the National Football League. Is that type of head coach going to fit Nick Sirianni?
Well, it has. I mean, he's the reason they went to the Super Bowl is because he stopped calling plays his first year. I don't know why this is suddenly a debate. Like, okay, well, what is he doing?
Yeah, I agree. He was already a CEO coach
for the last season, the last 2.5 seasons. You know, the concept of play calling head coach is incredibly flawed. And one of the things I adore about Nick, and I think this is genuine, is if he figures out, okay, I'm not good at this, let me see if somebody else is good at this, or how can I get better at this? He really does try to get better. Like, he's got a weird ego. He loves attention, but he doesn't need recognition. It's a strange combination. But when he backed off, it's just astounding the amount of humility and strength you have to have as a first-time head coach who's never called plays, to my knowledge. He might have done it in San Diego. I don't think so. But as a first-time head coach who's never called plays, to surrender play calling because you're not very good at it in the middle of your first season, that takes an incredible strength of character. I will always, that's the reason they went to the Super Bowl, a year later, because he showed that locker room that, yeah, I can be so accountable that I'm giving up the thing I've spent my whole life trying to get a chance to do, call plays on an NFL sideline. So the whole cheerleader, what is he gonna, I was a little ticked off at the room, John, the other day when somebody asked him that question. You're not calling, you can do this, you can do this. He's gonna do the same thing he did, following the Super Bowl. He's gonna do the same thing almost every Super Bowl coach has done. Very few hyper successful coaches are seriously involved with every play call. I mean, Bill Belichick, correct me if I'm wrong,
in a while,
Bill Belichick was a CEO.
Yeah.
Who's the greatest coach in history?
Bill.
Okay.
All right.
So let's just not have this conversation anymore because it's more than dumb. Okay, it's willfully obtuse. You're pretending that you can't, that coaches have never succeeded as a CEO entity.
Yeah. Well, Jody knows.
And it's always been my opinion.
Yeah,
all coaches, all NFL coaches should be CEO entities because I don't need Sean McVay over there looking at a screen with the quarterback while the defense is on the field. He might have to throw a flag for a review.
Right.
I don't need that.
By the way, Sean McVay was hilarious in his rookie season with the Rams. He would go sit with Jared Goff at the time.
Yeah.
And when Wade Phillips would run the deep end, he wouldn't even pay attention.
He wouldn't know what's going on in the game.
Yeah.
They'd have to tell him down in distance after the punt.
Yeah. Now here's you're right. And Jody knows I've always been a proponent of CEO coaches. And Nick was already a CEO coach before this. So that part of it, but the contextual aspect that's real from my perspective is and you've heard Nick say this multiple times. As somebody who's there every day for every press conference, I've heard him say it over 25 times. As long as I'm here, this is Nick speaking, this is going to be my offense. It doesn't matter. And he is actually quoted. Doesn't matter if it's Shane, Brian, he brought up Howie, Dom DeSandro, Marcus Hayes, Jody McDonald. Now I'm going off script. It's going to be my offense. It's now not his offense.
That's true.
By decree. That to me is the difference. How does that work? Can it work?
Well, let's get into an argument about semantics, okay? Because those are always fun.
Sure.
Unless Nick Sirianni is not involved at all with the construction of this offense, like the entire playbook, the schemes, the things that Jalen likes and or does well, the things that A.J. Brown likes and or does well, then it is kind of his offense. It's not as if he's going. I'll put it to you this way: it ain't going to be his defense, okay? No. So it's definitely going to be somewhat his offense. Again, this is a silly conversation to have, to think that, because what he also said in that press conference is that it's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles offense.
Our offense,
and he's going to retain. Right. He's going to retain some of the elements that work well. And so it's going to be less his offense. But again, that one day convinced me to give him the benefit of the doubt when it goes to like big picture macro issues. I believe that if this offense works and Kellen Moore gets hired by the Cowboys to replace Mike McCarthy next year.
Well, that'd be great, by the way. That's a great story. I hope that
it was supposed to happen. Like he was supposed to be the successor for what's his name?
Jason Garrett.
Jason Garrett.
Jason Garrett.
The clapper.
He was the resident genius down there. I was embedded there a couple of weeks too. Nick Sirianni's offense will never be run in the NFL again because parts of it don't work well. So his offense going forward, after assuming Kellen Moore gets another job somewhere as a head coach and everything works out for the Eagles next year, that'll be Nick Sirianni's new offense. I said all that to say he's willing to learn, he's willing to adapt. I don't think, if you remember, John, the first 6-7 games of his rookie year, the offense that the Eagles have run for the last 2.5 years did not resemble the offense that Nick Sirianni brought.
He was running Phillip Rivers. Yeah, we was running the Phillip Rivers offense. Yeah, exactly.
So the Nick Sirianni offense has already undergone a major overhaul, and I would contend that the overhaul it undergoes with Kellen Moore will be less dramatic than it was under Shane Steichen in the middle of the season, because you have a quarterback who's had input in that offense, and you have an offense that's largely returning. This is going to be one of my columns in the near future. If you have an offense that was relatively successful in a bad year when you won 11 games, outlandishly successful and took you to a Super Bowl the year before, and you return 85% of the players who made that offense work, and that may be a little high, but I don't think so. I think they've essentially had the same players, and essentially will have the same players 4 years in a row. How much why would you, like, you might tweak it, you might take things out and put things in.
That's what
you're not going to rebuild an offense and make the entire offense learn a new offense. That's insane.
Yeah.
Like, I think Kellen Moore is going to have elements of I think we're going to see 85% Nick Sirianni's offense and 15% whatever Kellen Moore likes to do, more motion, more under center, whatever.
You say 80, sort of 85-15?
Like, why would you change it that much?
Yeah,
it's not a failed offense.
Because they underachieved.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Did the offense underachieve? Or
Absolutely.
Did the team underachieve?
Absolutely, okay, the offense underachieved.
What would be
I set a pretty damn high bar, but I think it was a worthy high bar because they were as good as they were the year before. They were
No,
the
they
first or
weren't.
second best offense in the NFL.
They were just demonstrably not as good as they were the year before.
Well, and that's underachievement for me.
No, I'm saying that you're talking about the personnel. The personnel was not as good. The personnel was older. The personnel there was a book on the personnel. There were injuries to be accounted for. Most notably, again, Dallas Goedert. So no, they weren't as good as they were the year before.
Goddard missed games the game before.
And the quarterback
too.
was injured, and the quarterback was injured all year.
Well, the quarterback actually missed 2 games the year before. This year he missed none.
That doesn't mean he wasn't hurt.
All right. I don't know. Any of us know how hurt Jalen was. We know he didn't have any surgery done after the season, so we're all going to have to just speculate on that.
Well, number one, so far, the surgery he had done after last season was for an issue that predated him being a professional.
Yeah.
My point being, Jalen Hurts, the big narrative, and to ignore this or pretend it didn't happen, Jody, is just disingenuous. Jalen Hurts had a knee injury in the middle of the season that nobody didn't talk about at all. All we talked about all year is, oh, he doesn't have the burst. He must be nursing an injury. He didn't have the burst because he was nursing an injury. Yeah. And it was an injury that you know how you know it was a significant injury? He refused to talk about it.
And we did here on Birds 365. I remember the one game he almost couldn't walk off the field. He was limping like an old man going back to the sideline. I'm going, damn, his knees got to be bothering him.
So it wasn't the same offense. It wasn't the personnel was no river's the same when you step in it, right? You step in the same spot, it's a different river. The same is true of everything in life, but it was very true of this offense. And I'm not saying this offense was good. I'm just saying this offense wasn't horrible. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, and I'll say that too, but the bar was set before the year started. They did what they did. Like you said, they kept people intact, high-level talent, and it didn't come up nearly as well. If you want to just lay it off on Jalen Hurts was hurt, okay, fine.
I think
Brian Johnson did a bad job of calling plays. I think there were a lot of reasons that the Eagle offense went backwards this year.
Right, but the concept of like let's scrap the Nick Sirianni offense that was outrageously effective 2 years ago and pretty effective. I mean, think about the points when Jalen Hurts was healthy. And when the team was intact, they scored points like crazy on Kansas City. They scored points like crazy on the Buffalo Bills. I mean, they beat good teams because of the offense.
Yeah, in that aspect, I'm with Marcus. I don't get it. The offense was good, was darn good over the past 2 seasons, and that's kind of brings me back to my point where I don't understand why we're blowing everybody out, because I think it's too reactionary to what happened in the final 7 games, and you're forgetting that 2.5 years. But
so here's my question, okay? Here's
sure.
my question to you guys, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If Tracy Rocker, the defensive line coach, is going to get dinged for not developing the young guys and not managing the old guys. If
by the way, Fletcher was great this year. Sorry,
yeah,
Fletcher was great this year. Fletcher was great this year. But go ahead, Marcus. Sorry.
You guys are delusional. Fletcher Cox, when he injured his groin in Buffalo, he just didn't come back to the team. Like he was a non-factor after he injured.
Well, everybody was a non-factor in the past 6 games. The final
that was part of the year. I mean, yeah. the biggest reason they stunk down the stretch is because Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, and Jalen Carter disappeared. That's why they didn't win playoff games. That's why they lost games in the middle of the year. The middle of that defense was nothing after the Buffalo Bills game. I mean, they were the players who underachieved the most on the team in that stretch, and it's not even close. So anyway,
I'll take Bradbury, but that's just me.
Again, Bradbury's irrelevant if those guys can't play. Bradbury made some bad plays, but he wasn't 7-week stinker. Those guys just disappeared, and I don't blame them. They're the 2 guys are young, and Fletcher was hurt. But where was I? What was I talking about? Oh. So if Tracy Rocker can get dinged, the defensive line coach, for not developing the young guys, and if say DK McDonald gets dinged because he's not he didn't follow Denard Wilson, the defensive back coach, as well as he should have. If we're going to revamp the offense because Jalen Hurts regressed, Brian Johnson stunk, and Nick Sirianni couldn't figure it out, how is Kevin Patullo still on the staff? He's the pass game coordinator and the associate head coach.
So the head
The
coach
pass
is
game,
Yeah.
the pass. I'm just saying. I mean, if you want to talk about, you know, favoritism or whatever, just based on results, that is the guy. That is the AJ Brown. He got all these flowers. He's a former wide receivers coach. He got all these flowers for incorporating AJ Brown this, AJ Brown that. AJ Brown disappeared in the second half of the season. Jalen Hurts, you got a lot of credit for Jalen Hurts, you know, development and, you know, quick. Jalen Hurts had a 81 passer rating over the last 7 games. How is Kevin Patullo bulletproof?
Yeah, that's the one hill Nick would die on, I guess.
Yes, I agree.
The Mike Groh slash who was the quarterback's coach?
Press Taylor.
Press Taylor of the Nick Sirianni era.
Yeah.
And and it's probably Patullo. I don't know. Maybe it's Patullo and Sirianni together. He does stay lower profile. He's not attached to a specific group. So when the fingers start pointing and the axe starts falling, he's just off to the side enough that he could be negotiated. That he not on him. Where I really need him. I want to keep him.
I don't know. I'd say being the pass game coordinator is about as specific as you can get.
He's got a lot of administrative responsibilities. He's Nick's right-hand man when it comes to the logistics of coaching. I'm guessing that's how Nick sold. Nick sold it in that way,
and that's the associate head coach element of it.
Yeah.
He does a lot of things that takes takes stuff off the desk of the CEO because it is a really, really hard, busy job. Yeah. You know, even if you're not coordinating, you just don't have time. Every minute of Nick Sirianni's day is accounted for from the time he walks in the building to the time he leaves to go home, even as a non-coordinator.
Yeah.
All right, Marcus, last thing, and thank you very much for an extended period of time today. Who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
Rooting for?
Yeah.
I don't care.
You don't care. Good for you.
I have never.
A true journalist stance.
I don't care.
Good for you, Marcus Hayes.
Rooting for a good story. That's all.
I tell these guys in their face all the time. Coaches, players. I don't care if you win every game that you play for the rest of your life. I don't care if you lose every game that you play for the rest of your life. I don't wish you any misfortune. But I don't wish you any success. The person I root for is me. I root for me.
Exactly.
The best story possible.
Best story.
I was in Baltimore a couple days ago for that game, and it was astonishing. Taylor Swift was there. Okay. Andy Reid, the greatest coach alive, was there. John Harbaugh, maybe the best coach Andy Reid has had, maybe the best coach from his tree, was there. Jim Harbaugh was there the national championship coach was there to support his brother. Travis Kelce, arguably the greatest tight end of his era, depending on how you couch it, was there. Lamar Jackson, the most dynamic player and probably a 2-time MVP, was there. And Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. Don't forget Jason Kelce. Don't forget Jason.
And Patrick Mahomes. I guess you could say that maybe the second best quarterback in history now, maybe the third already.
He is ripping up the chart, isn't he? My God.
So it was just like, of all places, the Inner Harbor of Baltimore, Jason Kelce's presence notwithstanding, was just like this constellation of stars.
Yeah.
And there were just so many, to my point, I didn't care who won the game. There's going to be a great story coming out of it anyway. Yeah. If Lamar wins, he got over the hump and he can win the big game. If John Harbaugh wins, he does it in front of his national championship brother, who gets to follow him to the Super Bowl where he beat him before. If Andy wins, greatest coach ever. Patrick Mahomes wins, greatest quarterback ever. You know, if Travis Kelce catches a touchdown, Taylor Swift gets to kiss him on the field, which is what I wrote. Taylor Swift gets to kiss him on the field and make everybody angry that she has a boyfriend who plays in the NFL. So to answer your question, Jody, I root for this guy.
And you are rooting for the story as written by Marcus Hayes coming up in 12 days.
And that's the way it should be, the way Marcus does it. For all you aspiring journalists out there, do not root for a team. Yeah, do it the right way.
Good on you, Marcus, and we love it whenever you carve out a couple minutes. Join us on the show. Thank you much. Safe travels out to the West Coast to find your story for the Super Bowl. We'll certainly be reading it. Thanks, bud.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Marcus.
Marcus Hayes, Philadelphia Inquirer, and WIP. That was my question on WIP last night to the fans who are not journalists like Marcus Hayes and John McMullen. Who are you rooting for? Yeah, they don't want to root for anybody. They don't like either of the two sides, but it seems the lesser of the two Eagles for Eagles fans, at least as per on my lines last night, was the Chiefs. And not even because of Andy Reid, just there's a Taylor Swift blowback. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But people really don't like San Francisco because San Francisco talked the talk and walked the walk and came in and kicked the Eagles' ass this year.
In Philadelphia, they don't like San Francisco. But yeah, I mean, I don't care about Taylor.
Well, we are only 11 months from Harrison Butker kicking a field goal and keeping a parade from happening here in Philadelphia.
Well, that's
right?
true. That's true
And
too.
we already forgotten that. It was only 11 months ago that came down.
Yeah, I get a feeling that there's more hatred for San Francisco. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do want to, and Marcus is great, tremendously opinionated. I love opinionated people who have conviction. I do want to correct, Sean Desai's gotten interviews to be defensive coordinators. I'm a little surprised by that, by the way. Buffalo and Atlanta, but he has gotten interviews. So it's unfair to say he hasn't gotten interviews because he has. So he's not the lampoonish figure as he got the foot in the ass out the door here in Philadelphia. And
where I disagree with both you and Marcus, maybe I'm a bad dude, maybe I'm too much like Jeff Lurie. It's a cold, cool world in the National Football League.
Well, I agree with.
If you are hired to take over a team that was in the Super Bowl the year before, you don't get growing pains. You don't get growth. You don't get a built-in timeline. You got to be able. No, you hit the ground running. That's the job you're taking. If you're 3-13 and you get hired,
look at it. Time. That's not necessarily true. When you're rebuilding,
it's absolutely true, John. I'm stating my opinion here. I'm not saying that you have to follow it or Marcus have to follow it. I'm just stating my opinion.
You can have your opinion, but I'm saying look at it from a head coaching perspective. Now, there's a few that get blown out right away in the first season, and those are usually reactionary owners. Usually, when you're a bad team and you hire a head coach, you give them
We're not talking about head coach. We're talking about the coordinators.
Same thing with the coordinators.
You don't think there's a different standard between coordinators and head coaches?
No, there's a slightly different standard. But when you talk about coordinators, same thing. You hire a first-time coordinator. If you're a smart owner, you're not saying I'm going to have, I'm going to have the greatest coordinator in the history of the world year one. There's some growing on the job that's baked into it. You should know that. Maybe that's the word. You should know that as an owner that there's going to be some growing pains. If not, go hire 25-year veteran Vic Fangio. If you want experience, like you got Jim Schwartz, go get experience. But if you're hiring a first-year offensive coordinator and a guy with 1 year experience, and you don't expect growing pains, go look in the mirror, Jeffrey Lurie. If you didn't expect growing pains.
And the funny thing about it is, John, and you'll never get Jeff Lurie and or Howie Rosen to admit that, and this is just a theory I'm throwing out there right here, right now. Maybe and I said this last night on WIP, the Eagles had a bad season, certainly as per expectations. I had them going back to the Super Bowl, so I have my expectations, and they certainly came up short of that. Why? Why did that happen? What were the reasons? What were put them in an order? You know what I realized last night? I had no idea how important Shane Steichen was to this organization. I really didn't. And I think we saw the drop-off that we saw, and we saw Shane Doe go and do a good job with a Colts team that shouldn't have been competing for a playoff spot in the last week of the season. I think the Eagles at all, meaning Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman, maybe put a little too many eggs in Sirianni's basket and didn't realize we're losing a big chip here by watching Shane Steichen go out the door, and we can just elevate our quarterback coach. We'll be fine. It's Nick's offense because he tells us so. I think they did, and I'm copping to it too. I think I did underestimated the loss of Shane Steichen.
Well, I think Shane's great. I'm a big Shane fan. And I said that from day one. I thought there's going to be growing pains. In the offseason, people are like, it's going to be fine. and from the offensive perspective, they said everybody's going to be back, and you and I both consistently said Shane's pretty good at it. I don't think it's going to be
you more so
same.
than me. You were more worried about Shane's loss than I was. I knew it was a loss, but I didn't know how great it was going to be. And yeah, I'm putting it on Brian Johnson. And maybe
from the
fair or
defense,
unfair, but he paid for it with his job.
and from the defensive perspective, because of the hatred of JG, people were like, "Oh, it's got to be better than JG." Think about those stupid comments.
You know, you and I were on that same page. Nobody gave Gannon enough credit for how good he was. That comes as a surprise to no one. You and I were both, I think, righteously so, giving Gannon the credit that he deserved. He's McMullen. I'm McDonald. We're gonna get a quickie timeout. Come in, come back. We got Johnny Marks. That's right, Johnny Marks, longtime Philadelphia radio talk show host, is going to jump on with us here on Birds 365. And Eagles fans, check this out. Here's your chance to save up to 40% on your car insurance right now from one of JAKIB Sports' great partners. Here's what you do. Call managing partner either Jim or Fran and tell them you're a friend of JAKIB Sports and Birds 365.